Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I'd like to offer my greetings to everyone and welcome everyone this evening. So tomorrow is Visakha Puja, which is the biggest and most important of the holy days in the Buddhist calendar. So in Thailand, we have three main holy days. We have uh, Asalaha Puja, which is right before we start the rains retreat. And that's the day where we remember the first sermon that the Buddha gave. So the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the turning of the wheel of Dhamma discourse. So that was when he gave it to the five ascetics at the deer park at Saranath. And because it's about the first Dhamma talk, the first discord, some people refer to that as the Dhamma day. And then we have Magha Puja, which is when we remember an event in the Buddha's life when 1,250 monks who are all enlightened came together to pay respects to the Buddha. And he gave this teaching called the Awada Patimokkha. And so because it's, this Sangha event, this is the Sangha day. And so today, because it's all about the Buddha's life, this one is the Buddha day, or well, tomorrow. So tomorrow on Visakha Puja, we remember these three really important events in the Buddha's life, which all took place on the same day. So the first is the birth of the Buddha. So the Buddha was born on this day, and well, his mother was traveling back to, was in the middle of traveling, and she gave birth in the forest along the side of the road. And then the next event is the enlightenment of the Buddha. So this was 35 years later, when he was 35 years old, is when he actually became enlightened, sitting under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya. Was actually able to become fully enlightened. And then the third, we call the Parinibbana. So this is when the Buddha died. And this happened on this day when the Buddha was 80 years old. So these are the three, big events we recollect today, or for Visakha Puja. These are the three big events. And so in a lot of different monasteries, a lot of different places, they'll have different ways of celebrating today. So kind of the traditional way is, everyone will go to the monasteries and there'll be some chanting, and then a bit of like an evening meeting, chanting, meditation, and then it usually has a circumambulation. So people will take candles and incense, and they'll walk around some kind of holy object within the monastery. So if there's a chedi with relics of the Buddha in it, we'll usually circumambulate and walk around that. If there isn't, there'll sometimes be the Uposatha hall of the monastery, or any sacred place. So at this monastery I stayed in Australia, they have this pond there, which they call a dam in Australia, and there's a pavilion with a Buddha Rupa in the middle of it. So we would walk around that as a circumambulation and recollecting these important events in the life of the Buddha. But at Wat Pananachat, where I ordained, we used to do that. But in more recent years, they've changed around how we do it. What they'll do now is for Visakha Puja, we'll have an evening meeting, and then the life story of the Buddha we'll break it up into little sections, these little sections from the suttas, and we'll have each monk, novice, and pakao living there will each read a little section of it in English, and then the different lay people who are there will come up and read those same sections but in Thai. And so it becomes this really, really fun night, really, interactive night where we're going over these important suttas from the life of the Buddha. So generally, when um, people are talking on Visakha Puja and giving Dhamma talks or doing these reflections on Visakha Puja, a lot of times we really focus on the enlightenment of the Buddha. Because again, this was this big and important event. If he didn't become enlightened, there'd be no Buddhism. So this was a very, very important event in the life of the Buddha, in the beginnings of the whole Buddhist sasana, the whole Buddhist religion, and this opening up this opportunity for everyone to become enlightened. So after the Buddha's enlightenment, he spent the rest of his life teaching what he had realized. And again, it's really important that it wasn't what he created. He didn't create the Dhamma. This isn't something that he um, just made up with. It's not his like, personal self-help method. The Dhamma is timeless. So when we chant the reflections on the Dhamma, we say it's a kaliko, it's timeless. So the Dhamma is there whether there's a Buddha or not, whether there's a Buddha sasana or not. These are just natural laws. This is just part of, the way things are in samsara. So Dhamma is always there. The Buddha just discovered it. And then he spent the rest of his life teaching everyone what he was able to discover. But it's really interesting because after the Buddha's enlightenment, he had practiced for years building up to this, and then finally, he sat down under the Bodhi tree and said, I'm not getting up until I'm enlightened. And he was able to do this because he was so close to being enlightened. He had so much of this paramis, these spiritual qualities, these potential, and he was so close to begin with. And he sat there for 40 days and 40 nights, and then was finally able to break through and to have these realizations and to become enlightened. But after he did this, he was just what he had realized and what he had come to discover was just so deep and so profound that that he didn't know if anyone would be able to understand it. So he was afterwards he was thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't teach. Maybe I shouldn't, I should just enjoy, being enlightened and then just until I eventually die. And then the Brahma Sahampati came to him and, asked him to teach, asked him to pass this on, and told him, there's those with but little dust in their eyes. So there's some people who actually can get it. Not everyone's going to get it, but, some people can get it. And this is, again something really important that not everyone's going to be interested in Dhamma. Not everyone's going to want to practice. So it's something, especially when you come new to Dhamma, when you really start getting into Dhamma practice, one of the things is for a lot of people, it's, you find it's so profound, it's so deep. And when you start practicing it, you really start to see the changes in yourself, the changes in your life. And of course, we still go through ups and downs in life. That's just how life is. But you see how much it helps you, and how profound it is, and how you feel it's so important to start practicing this. And then you start noticing that other people just don't have that interest. So sometimes, when you're really new into it, you can be really zealous, and you want to tell everyone about it and tell everyone this, and then you find some people just don't have that interest in it, and it's surprising. You're like, well, this is helping so much. This is really pointing to the end of suffering. You know, why wouldn't you be interested in this? And so, but this is, coming back to when the Buddha became enlightened, it's not everybody is going to be interested. There are those with but little dust in their eyes. So there are some who are going to have this more inclination towards it. And then but also again on this day is the day that the Buddha died. He's had what was called the parinibbana. And so last year at Wat Pananachat, was in Thailand at the time for Visakha Puja. And instead of focusing on doing readings and reflections on the enlightenment of the Buddha, we focused on actually the parinibbana of the Buddha, the passing away of the Buddha, because this doesn't get as much attention as the other aspects of it. So the Buddha actually, kind of what caused his death, his passing away, was actually interesting enough, was food poisoning. He ate this dish called pig's delight, and he ended up. And after he ate it, he said, "No, no other monks eat this. Don't eat this," because he realized at that point that it wasn't good, and he was going to die from this. And and so he actually made sure to have a monk go and tell the person who had offered this food, don't worry, you didn't make bad karma by this. You offered me food, and being my last meal, it's actually, you made a lot of merit for this. So don't think you made bad merit for this or some kind of bad karma, because the intention wasn't bad. The intention wasn't to try to kill the Buddha. The intention was to feed the Buddha, to give him a meal. It just happened to be off. And there's some debate on some between some monks and some scholars about what exactly this dish was, because it was called pig's delight. So some think it may have been a pork dish. Other people think it may have been like truffles, but it was whatever it was, it had gone off, and the Buddha ended up dying from that. So even though the Buddha, he was this, enlightened being, he was able to become enlightened by himself. He didn't need the teacher. He didn't have to have someone show him the way. He was able to discover it on his own, which is something very, very special to a Buddha. We call it like a Sama Sambuddha, so like a self-enlightened Buddha. And and even though all that, his body, he was still human. He was still a man. He was still human, and his body was still affected, and was still subject to everything that everyone else's bodies are subject to. And so, and then when he died, all these monks and everyone came together to be with him at the time of death, because it wasn't just a very quick death, and so everyone came together to see him. Um, and in his last instructions to the monks, to the sangha, he was saying to for that everything is impermanent and changing, and for us to strive on with diligence, so with heedfulness. So it was again, his last instructions was us to go for it, put forth effort, and really put that into your practice. And so this is important for us to remember on a day like today. Like, even the Buddha, for all that, he died too. This is just something we're all subject to. And for us, when we keep that in mind, to put that effort into our practice and into um, trying to become enlightened, or at least get um, into as far towards enlightenment as we can. And so so yeah, so this today is this day when we reflect on that, we come together, and we can do it as it's called Buddha Anusati, so a recollection of the Buddha, and this is a type of meditation. So we can reflect on his life, his being born. He was born into as a prince into this life of real luxury. He had different palaces for the different seasons, the three seasons there. He had a beautiful wife, who was very caring. He had a newborn son. He had everything which you'd think you'd want, and yet still he had dukkha. He had suffering. He had this unhappiness. And when he was outside of the palace, he saw an old man, a sick man, a dead man. And he realized, I'm the same as these people. So no matter how much I gain, all that material stuff I gain, I can't take with that with me afterwards. I'm still subject to old age, sickness, and death, the same as everyone else. And then he saw a samana, so like a recluse, like a monk or a holy man. And he was like, okay, that that is, that's a path I can do. Here's someone striving to get beyond that. I'm going to do that too. I'm going to strive to go beyond that. And so he left the palace. He cut off his hair, put on the yellow robes of a samana at the time, and he went out to practice. And he practiced really hard. Like he really did. He went to find the best teachers he could in the land at the time. So he went to Alara Kamala, and he went to Adaka Ramaputta, and they taught him these really deep jhanas. They're called arupa jhanas, like the formless jhanas. So these are like some of the deepest states of concentration you can get into. And, and he mastered that. He mastered their system of teaching. And at the end of it, he was still, like, this isn't quite it. I haven't uprooted it myself. So he went out and practiced more, and he practiced this extreme austerity, like starving himself and doing all these really austere practices, and took them to the extreme. And then he said, this isn't working either. And, I'm just too tired and worn out to even practice properly. So then he, decided to go the middle path. That's when he decided to sit under the Bodhi tree and not get up until he had become enlightened. And so after that, he went on to teach, and he taught people not to do those path of austerities, not to do those extreme self-torture like he had done. And he had also taught us not to go in the extremes of indulgence and sensual indulgence, to walk the middle path between the two. And and really taught, for us to practice. And the heart of all the Buddhist practice, it comes down to, it's not on Visakha Puja we celebrate it, it's on Asalaha Puja, but it really comes back to the Four Noble Truths, that this is suffering, the dukkha, stress, suffering, that this is just part of our lives. This is, something which is there. And then he taught us, the cause of suffering, because everything has a cause. Things don't just come on their own. Things arise based on causes. So, he taught the cause of suffering. And this cause of suffering is tanha, or craving. And so a lot of times when we think of craving, we think of just sensual craving, craving for, beautiful things, nice things, but he said there's three types of craving, craving for sensual pleasures, craving to become, to be, and then craving not to be, or things to be different than they are. So he said, these three types of craving are the cause of this suffering. And then he taught us the third noble truth, which is the cessation of this craving. And so he said that this craving is, we get rid of it by abandoning it, letting go of it, giving it up, not by indulging in it. Because, a lot of times, when a craving comes up, you want to indulge in it, oh, I'm craving for pizza. The way to get rid of the craving for pizza is to have some pizza. And, the Buddha taught us that's not actually the way to get rid of it. That'll temporarily alleviate it, but the craving comes back. And so, and then he taught us the fourth noble truth, which is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So this is the path of practice. And all throughout the Buddha's life, he taught so many different things and to different people in different circumstances. So, some people would come to him and, ask about advice in worldly matters too, and he'd give them advice on that. There was even one time one king came to him, and this king was quite obese, and the Buddha even gave him, some advice on how to lose some weight. So, he'd give all these things on these worldly things. He'd teach people where they were at, teach people what they were interested in, but he'd always, bring it back to enlightenment. With everything he taught and all these different things he taught, still the heart of it, the core of it is still, these four noble truths. And this is the real heart of Buddhism. So sometimes, we can start we start seeing all these books, and we read this and we read that, and or just looking at the Tipitaka, and we can feel really overwhelmed. The countless Dhamma lists, the four of these, the six of these, and we can feel overwhelmed at sometimes, like, oh well, what am I supposed to be doing? Like it just seems so much. I seem confused. So when we start feeling like that, always remember it always comes back to, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. And we keep this as, a heart of our practice, the heart of the teachings of the Buddha. So I'd like to offer this as a bit of a reflection for everyone this evening.